Welcome to r/RedditRevenge. This is a story of someone getting back at someone with revenge after being wronged. And today we have 3 great stories, so subscribe, hit the like button, and let's begin. The first story, guy gave the wrong facts and was fired. The second story, apartment complex tries to screw me, so I return the favor. The third story, I made a surprise cake to a nasty colleague. And the first story is, better check your facts, because people know people. The internet has evolved quite a lot over the years. Some people may remember Usenet groups. I know I do. Used to have a lot of fun reading them. Kind of similar in a way to today's Reddit in a way. No matter what the subject was, someone would have a Usenet news group for it. But unlike today's Reddit, it was strictly text. You could download images, but they would take forever to download, and could often be across several different messages. Just one of the messages missing, and you wouldn't get the image. Things then improved. Download speeds slowly got faster, and then there was IRC that came about. IRC saw the same thing. There was chat room for anything and everything, and if there wasn't, you could clearly create it. If you were to try to watch a video over the internet back then, it could take you a couple of hours to download a music video. You get the idea. This is important for the context of the story. I was a writer on a couple of wrestling newsletters during the mid to late 90s. We only published our newsletters online. You could have it emailed to you or go to a website to read it. Think we hosted on GeoCities or Tripod. Both wrestling newsletters were independent of each other, and I used different nicknames on each. One was more of a review and preview newsletter, where we would post reviews of the most recent shows and events, talk about current feuds, and talk about what we may think will happen in the next big event. The other newsletter was a news and rumors newsletter, with a few fun puzzles and competitions thrown in to keep things interesting. At the time, you had a few big-name wrestling news and rumors websites, and a handful of small ones. I was a writer on one of the small ones. Sometimes we would get news and rumors from the big-name websites, giving them credit where appropriate. Sometimes we would hear things from people in the business. Everyone had their sources of information. And sometimes we would make an uneducated guess on possible scenarios, based on current trends in the industry. It did get a bit cutthroat at times, with some newsletters claiming that they broke the news first, when it had already been published in other newsletters first. And you would even have some newsletters devote all of their time trying to rubbish the other newsletters for publishing false and misleading information. It was rumors. We didn't always get it right. Through a couple of readers of my first wrestling newsletter, I learned of a huge surprise in the works for one organization, which could potentially lead to something happening at a big event coming up. I won't mention the surprise, but it involved a person from another sport. No other wrestling newsletter had reported it, so I included it as a rumor on the second wrestling newsletter. I was instantly rubbished by one of the major wrestling newsletters at the time, publishing a clearly nonsense rumor that would never happen, only for that very same newsletter to publish the exact same rumor 2 or 3 days later, and claim to be the first ones to publish it. This sort of stuff happened all the time. It didn't bother me at all. Anyway, I happened to have a few wrestlers who actually read my first newsletter. No big names as such, but a couple of lesser-known wrestlers in the big organizations. I knew who they were, but refused to reveal their identities back then, and refused to reveal them now. One of them let me know of an unknown fact from a major match a couple of years earlier. It was to do with an injury that happened during a part of the match. This fact had never been published anywhere else at the time. I mentioned that I wrote for another wrestling newsletter that dealt with news and rumors, and asked if I could repeat the information. The wrestler said sure, but not to credit him. So I go ahead and publish the rumor. Straight away, I had another one of the smaller wrestling newsletters say that it was nonsense. They said that it was impossible for the match to have continued had the injury happened. They then started a smear campaign on the second newsletter. I was getting spam emails constantly, virus attempts originating from the competition. The competition even went so far as claiming that they had the full story of my wife of 10 years working as a stripper. Don't ask, they were trying to find anything to smear me with. There was more sinister and disgusting stuff, but I won't write it here. Why it got so personal, I don't know. But the funny thing was that at the time, I was a 22-year-old single university student, and if I had had a wife of 10 years who was working as a stripper, I would have had to marry her when I was 12. But his smear campaign was working. Our readership dropped by nearly 50%. It was time to get some revenge, although I had no idea just how far the revenge would end up reaching. Firstly, I approached one of the bigger wrestling newsletters. They would often run ads at the bottom or rear of their newsletters for affiliated newsletters. I organized a new affiliation with them, removing an affiliation they had with the competition. Small potatoes. I started promoting the second newsletter heavily on Usenet in some of the wrestling groups, which ultimately led to an increase in our email subscription base, greater than what it was before his smear campaign. This negated any effect that his smear campaign had, but I was hungry for more. I wanted to shove it where the sun don't shine, so I contacted those wrestlers who read my first newsletter. I explained the situation to them, and they were happy to help out. It took a couple of weeks, but eventually I was able to post a link to a 15-second video, hosted on a GeoCities webpage, as well as on a wrestling Usenet group, where the wrestler at the center of the injury rumor not only confirmed it, but gave a shout out to my second newsletter. While it validated me and my information, it still didn't shut the other guy up. Finally, a break. While the guy used an alias for his newsletter, he did actually mention his name a couple of times, and where in the US he attended university. Using this information, I was able to get a friend in the US to do some searching for me, attended that very same university, and discovered that the guy had actually completed a journalism degree several years earlier. Further research indicated that he was now working as a reporter for a regional newspaper in the US. His wrestling newsletter must just be a hobby. So I decided to send all the information I had, his smear campaign, etc., to the newspaper office. I don't know what, if anything, it would do, but it was worth a shot. About a month later, I got an email back from the newspaper, thanking me for the information. They discovered that he was using the newspaper's system to run the wrestling newsletter, which was against their policy, so they fired him. And because the newspaper was part of a chain of regional newspapers across the US, he was going to struggle to find another journalism job. The newsletter got shut down as well, because without the newspaper's system to run it, the guy had no way of continuing with the newsletter. Side note, I ended up finishing with my newsletters not long after anyway. The first newsletter, as I was just a writer for it, I finished up with it when the owner of the newsletter decided to close it down. He didn't have the time to devote to it due to work commitments. The second one I started off as just a writer/contributor, then took over their competitions, then eventually took over the whole newsletter. Original owner didn't want to do it anymore. But in the end, I was finishing up at university. I had to move on with my career, so I closed it down. The second story is, try to make me pay for something that was already there? I'll see you in court. A few years back, I was moving into a new apartment with a coworker of mine. He was an okay roommate, good guy overall, just did some SH things. Not the focus of the story though. Anyway, so as we move in, they give us the inventory of the apartment, so we can mark everything that's wrong with it. They tell us they just had the carpets replaced 18 days earlier, and that the maintenance crew had also replaced the stove and bathtub. Yay for us, right? So we went through and started marking stuff. I'm a bit anal retentive about this stuff, so I marked every little mark, ding, scratch, etc. in the place. In this allegedly new grayish carpet, you know the type that will quickly stain when the sun shines on it? There were 3 smallish stains on it, all off yellow, one in the living room, one in my room, and one in my roommate's room. We marked this down and made sure we were as specific as later. When we finished up, turned the inventory in, went over it with the leasing agent who signed that it was accurate, and we were good to go. I move in with my pup, and my roommate moves in with his cat. Fast forward 14 months. I'm moving out to move in with a couple of other friends, and we're getting ready to clean and whatnot, when who shows up but Karen, the leasing agent for the pre-inspection. I was at work at the time, but my girlfriend was there. Apparently Karen walks in, down the hallway, says, "Oh yes, carpet," and then walks out. She'd been in the apartment less than a minute. Now, even though we were guys and not super clean freaks, we did maintain an overall clean environment, according to my girlfriend, so her saying that was weird. We figured we were okay. Yeah, stupid us. We moved out and on our separate ways. I get a bill in the mail 3 weeks after move out for $1,400 for carpet replacement and other random cleaning things. Now, some of those things were completely on me or my roommate, because 1, my roommate got attacked right one night about a week or 2 before we moved in, so he did no cleaning whatsoever. My girlfriend and I did our best, but we figured we'd get dinged a little. But not the full $500 deposit, and then an extra $1,400. Holy SH. I sit down with Karen and Karen's boss, Super B, and ask basically WTF. They brought up the 3 stains, and said they were made either by my dog or roomie's cat. They also said the inventory on our first day that Karen signed was invalid because I was too thorough for it to be true, and the carpet was brand new. I basically said that's BS and I'm not paying it. So Super B sent it to collections. I fought it for a year with the collection agency and got nowhere. It took my credit score from around a 750 to a 650. Needless to say, I was exhausted from my high-stress job, from fighting this, and I was just ready to pay it to be done. Until the best girlfriend in the world pointed out that I should just sue them. So I did. I sued the apartment complex for $7,500, the max I could sue in small claims without needing to get a lawyer involved. I couldn't afford one. I had the sheriff's department deliver the lawsuit paperwork to the apartment complex's parent company and had a court date set. I was scared SH-less, as I had never done this kind of thing before. I prepped what little evidence I had and went to court. The Honorable Judge Awesome McAwesome Sauce was presiding that day, and when my case was called, I went up with my evidence and the apartment complex. So Judge Awesome asked me why I was suing for such a large amount. I explained about the situation, showed that I had the inventory with their signature that clearly said both parties agreed there were stains on the carpet prior to my move-in, and therefore I didn't think it was fair I had to pay for the carpet. But I was willing to pay what I knew I owed if they would just remove my bill from collections. I also said I had called in sick from the anxiety of dealing with this a few times over the last year, and I was currently missing work to be in court that day. And while I didn't expect to get $7,500, I wanted to get their attention and stick it to them because they can't just treat people like this. Judge Awesome listened and smiled and said something along the lines of, "Well, since they aren't here, I'll give you a summary judgment, which means you win, and not only do you not have to pay for the carpet, but you can have your full deposit back." I wanted to start dancing, but I'm in court and a terrible dancer, so I didn't. He gave me my full deposit back, plus the few days of work I missed, even though I said I got sick pay for it. All in all, it was about $1,500, and he ordered that they remove it from my credit and take it from collections. I called them up and told them that I had sued them today and won. Super Beast said, "Oh, well, we had a mix-up, and our lawyers forgot to show up, but would you still like to pay your bill?" I laughed at her and said F no and hung up. They tried to not pay initially, so I sent them a letter with the judge's judgment and said I would put a lien on the company if they didn't pay up, so I got a check about a week later. Basically, take photos, get copies, and never just pay the bill if you don't actually owe it. It is worth fighting in court if it's truly not on you. The last story is, how do you like that donut now? This happened about 20 years ago when I was a teacher in a small high school. There was one teacher who was toxic and would say inappropriate things to students about the teachers he didn't like. He once told some students of mine that I didn't get invited to parties because I was a stiff. His dislike for me stemmed from the fact that I was vying for promotion to vice principal, and he felt threatened by it. One day he brought in donuts and left them in the staff room. However, being the guy he was, he put little toothpick flags in them with everyone's names on them but mine. He also left a note on the table saying, "Help yourself, not you, OP." The one with his name on it was one of those powdered jelly-filled things. In full view of some of the other teachers who were gobsmacked by his behavior, I took a straw, sucked all the jelly out of it, then refilled it with mustard. Then I put it back into the box, unwrapped my sandwich, and waited. He came into the lunchroom with an SH-eating grin on his face as he looked at me and nodded. I munched my carrot sticks. One of the women thanked him for the donuts. He just smirked, picked his up, and took a big bite of it right in front of me. The look of horror, confusion, and disgust on his face was priceless. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you liked it, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell button.